Hello, welcome to Bear in Mind's Around the World in 50 Films. We have taken our balloon just a bit north today and have touched down in Northern Ireland. There's a couple of films we were considering for this. We settled on one, but you watched two, I believe, Matt, while we were here, and have some thoughts on the second one as well.
Yeah, yeah. I know you started the second one. I managed to watch all of it. I do think the one that we're going to focus on primarily today is the better of the two films. But the second film has some interesting ideas if it doesn't necessarily actually manage to realize those ideas, especially in our current political climate. I think it sort of foreshadowed a few things. So we'll mention that one later. We'll have a little discussion on that. Excuse me. But yeah, the first film is Mickey Bo and Me, which was released in 2004, I believe.
Available on UK Netflix, at least, if anyone
Yeah,
wants to watch it. I don't know if it's how its global availability is, but that's how we watched it.
yeah. I mean, with its age, it's probably something that's either hiding on a streaming service internationally, or to be honest, you could probably pick a DVD or a Blu-ray up quite cheap at this point. I would think.
Me was it's
Hmm?
2004, right?
Yeah, 2004. Yeah,
For it's a period piece for the most part.
yeah, set in 1970.
Yeah, and it actually feels like it's a film that could have come from that era as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's some very deliberate stylistic choices as far as the cinematography goes. At times, there's a little hint of grain to the film quality. Although I think some of that is to mirror the film that's within the film, because the two little boys in question, the story. Before we go too far, the story is of a young Catholic boy and a young Protestant boy in Northern Ireland who live opposite sides of the town. And of course, during the Troubles, that was quite common that you'd have a Protestant side and a Catholic side, and you would never dare cross the boundary. In this case, it was the train line that had a bridge over it, because unfortunately, terrible things would happen. But these two little boys, they become friends, and one day they manage to make their way into the cinema and watch Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which was a film that came out in 1969, so the year prior to the setting of this film. And they become obsessed with it and try and recreate the events of it and live the same life as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. So yeah, I think some of the cinematic choices, like the little bits of grain every now and again, are very deliberate nods to Butch Cassidy. Even though I think this may have been shot on digital, because I did notice some interlacing.
I wouldn't be surprised for its budget and its when it was made.
Yeah, so I mean, it might have been a relatively early digital film. So I don't know what the budget was, but it probably wasn't that high. Although there are some fairly decent actors in it. Julie Walters plays the mother of one of the characters.
Of Mickey Bo.
Of Mickey Bo, yeah.
And the
And
narrator of the film is Jojo.
yes, the other character, Jojo,
Yeah, the
who
me
is
in the title.
yeah. Now I don't think they ever explicitly say which one's the Catholic and which one's the Protestant, although it's fairly obvious. Mickey Bo is from the Catholic family, and Jojo's from the Protestant family. So, oddly enough, Julie Walters playing the mother of a very large Catholic family in this case, with a handful of gingers, and it was at roughly the same period in time that she'd been playing Mrs. Weasley in the Harry
There
Potter
is
films.
a similarity in the performance.
There's a similarity in the performance. I think there's a similarity in the realization of the family. They're not dissimilar.
No,
So I don't know what the family was like in because it's an adaptation of a stage play. So I don't know exactly what the family was like in the stage play, but yeah, in the film, they are certainly Muggle Weasleys, shall we say?
The comparisons between the families is quite interesting. Out of
Mm,
the two of them, Mickey Bo is probably the more rebellious of the two kids, and the one who kind of eggs Jojo. Is it Jojo?
it is Jojo, yeah.
Yeah, eggs Jojo on.
John Joe.
John Joe, yeah. So Jojo
John
would
Joe.
be the recent film
About rabbits and
Yeah.
Hitler. Yeah.
John Joe, yeah. So, but Mickey Bo comes from. There's issues in his family life, but it's a mostly loving family home.
Definitely, yeah.
While John Joe comes from a broken home. He hasn't realised that quite yet, but
Nor necessarily have his parents, because I think
Yeah.
his father, as much as he's a philanderer, feels that he's managed to keep a balance that he's happy with, and the mother, at least in the beginning of the film, kind of accepts that balance as well. The dad obviously has a job, provides for the family. They have a nice-ish house. They're not wanting for anything. They go out for treats and things like that. And specifically to the ice cream parlor. And so if he's sleeping around a bit, there seems to be a bit of a, oh, well, it could be worse sort of feeling, at least at the beginning of the film anyway.
The breaking point in that is what spurs for kids to run away. And they go on the run as outlaws, thinking they think they are being hunted by the police for murder.
Yes, because there's as in most towns, there's the scary old man that lives down the road, and which we encounter at some point when Mickey Bo steals some apples from his garden.
The film is in Belfast, isn't it?
You know what? I don't know.
I think it is Belfast.
I always got the feeling it was a small town that wasn't in Belfast, but maybe not far from Belfast.
John Joe's narration does talk about Belfast being a divided city.
Yes. Although it didn't feel like it was central Belfast. It almost felt like it was like in the outskirts somewhere. Excuse me. So there was a scary old man who lived down the road, and Mickey Bo stole some apples off him, and that was like. And then later they break into his house to go and see what treats and trinkets they can find, and they discover that the old man has died in the bath, which is very sad, obviously. But in the process, they find his gun, and obviously at the time there was a lot of violence in Northern Ireland, but also guns to a certain degree compared to what they are now were legal as well. So it wasn't as uncommon of an item as you might expect. Something that they point out towards the end of the film when they're returning from the Republic of Ireland, because they accidentally crossed the border. They were hoping to cross the border, but they were expecting it to be some big grand wall that they needed to scale and climb and what have you. But they just happened to run across a farmer's field that straddled the border at some point. Excuse me. And the Irish policeman, the Republic of Ireland policeman, noted that there aren't any guns down there, or there are very few guns in the Republic of Ireland, and unfortunately they'd get to see enough guns to fill a lifetime when they went back north of the border. And I think that's a excuse me. It's a very nicely done film, this, in that obviously the two boys are the focus and it's all about friendship, but they very carefully interweave commentary on the Troubles. Sometimes
I said to you yesterday, it's a glance at the Troubles through the eyes of two innocents who can't quite grasp or comprehend the enormity of what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, Mickey Bow in particular, because it like on his side of the city, that's where the majority of the violence is, and so for him, there's a scene where there's been an explosion in a pub. One of the bombs has gone off, and he's just running around finding stuff, and he finds some treasure. And there's a lovely little bit where he's holding a finger from a person that's been blown up, and there's this like huge big gold ring on it, and he says, "Look, I found some treasure." And he pulls the ring off and then throws the ring away, and of course he keeps the finger.
Yeah,
pockets the finger, and it's like it's hilarious and yet really shocking at the same time. And I think that's the wonderful thing with this film, that like it does deliver some brutal realities through most of the time actually a lens of humor and
I mean, it is described as a black comedy. I've seen it kind of described as.
I think it is a black comedy, to be honest. Yeah. I think it's because a lot of the time it is very funny, like, but obviously it's quite grim, as it should be. But I think it's a beautiful tale of friendship, and it's one that gives you hope. And of course, this had come after way after the Good Friday Agreement as well. So it was a slightly retrospective thing, looking from a time of peace to a time where peace was not a thing. I think it was it was interesting. I mean, because both of us remember the Troubles, obviously not first hand because we weren't in Ireland, in Northern Ireland in particular.
I'm slightly too young to. I know them as a thing more than have any real recollection of events.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I remember various bombings making the news and what have you. And there was when was it? It was in '97. The one in Arndale Centre. Let's have a look. 96
then.
96 it was.
I would have been 7 then, and I
yeah.
Really...
I mean, I remember that because I was in high school at the time. I think I would have been. Ooh, how old? 13? Yeah, would have been 13 probably, maybe 14. What date? What? Yeah, 13 it would have been. And there'd been the bombing in the Arndale Centre, which was one of the biggest and worst of the IRA attacks, and obviously it's a strange one to think, like, because obviously it's so long ago now as well that like it's so easy to forget that these things were actually quite, on your doorstep. You live in Crewe, I lived in Sandbach at the time, which is less than an hour away from Manchester. And someone the day after the Arndale bombing called a bomb threat into my high school, and I remember we had to evacuate the high school and all go out onto the sports fields. And I mean, we'd had various fire drills over the times and stuff like that, so we knew what we were doing, and it was not lovely and smooth. And it is one of those times where, like, you realise why fire drills and the likes are done. But we were out there for about 2 or 3 hours because the police had to come and do a full check of the school and declare it safe. It was
why we're on
odd.
This frame of mind as well. It's I think it's a very important piece of modern British history that isn't really discussed or taught in schools. So if anyone is wanting to know more, and they live in the UK. It is on BBC iPlayer at the moment an absolutely fantastic multi-part documentary.
Yeah, we're going to be posting this in early November 2020. So if anyone's watching this way into the future,
I think it's one of those ones where BBC have decided it's important enough to give it a long length of time on there as opposed to 30 days because it aired earlier this year.
Yeah. Hopefully it's one that will stay there then.
And it approaches and looks at the conflicts from both sides, from all angles, from the crimes that the British Army perpetrated there, from what the IRA themselves did, from what is it the Ulster?
The Unionists.
Yeah, the Unionists. It has Irish, Northern Irish hosts, and each host gets 2 episodes to discuss a different side and angle of a conflict. And very well worth a watch if anyone.
Yeah, I think
wants to know more about this rather major conflict on.
It's an odd one because I mean, obviously, I am old enough to remember at least some of it. Like, and again, not necessarily from a direct experience of it, but more of a secondary thing, like I just described with my school. And I think a lot of the time it was almost just assumed that we're aware of it. So it wasn't necessarily talked about or discussed in schools when I was in school. Because it was just something.
It was at the time.
Yeah.
It's more the fact that we never. Even nowadays, it's not something that's.
But then, I mean, that's another issue with with the school curriculum in England, especially, but in I think the whole of mainland United Kingdom, in that we don't learn a lot of the bad side of our history. No. So that we don't learn even things of relatively recent times, like the Troubles in Northern Ireland, or even what we've done to the Irish. We've discussed in previous episodes how bad the English are to our neighbours. But the Irish, if anything, got the worst of the lot. And it's just something that we don't even think about. And it's something that because we don't get taught about it. We don't get taught about the severity of it. We know that things like the potato famine happened, but we don't know the ins and outs of it.
Schools learn. You learn at least in English schools, about the greatness of the British Empire, and not necessarily its many.
History is written by the victor in the end, isn't it? And it's the same case in every single country. Like, unfortunately, there's always a bias, and there always will be a bias. But I think it is something that is, as I've got older and I've learned more, it's more shocking than I think it's more shocking because A, it's on our doorstep, and B, because it's so recent. I think I can sort of, and I don't want to use the term write off, but I can sort of expect that awful things were done by the British and by the English in particular in the times of the Empire, when it was in far off distant lands where we believed these people to be savages and things like that. That's
but still when it's bad things.
I mean, I'm not saying it isn't bad. I'm just saying it's something that I kind of awfully I sort of expect it to happen. Whereas obviously when it's people on your doorstep, I've always thought of Ireland as not necessarily part of Britain, but not it. They are most certainly our neighbours. They are our brothers and sisters, our cousins. I have cousins that live there. There's a familial sense with Ireland, but I didn't know until recently that it wasn't necessarily reciprocated.
Yeah, think it's a case of I personally think a country will be in a healthier place if it can learn to both to reckon with its past, both the good and the bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that people wandering around today should blame themselves for things that happened in the past, but I think it's healthy to acknowledge, because it's quite often accused of when you're saying like of being unpatriotic, and I don't think it is to acknowledge and to reckon, because if you can't even admit it happened, then you're just letting yourself reperpetrate.
No, I mean, surely patriotism is about making the country the best you can make it, and surely part of making it the best that you can make it is learning from the mistakes of the past, and some of those mistakes are incredibly grim. So let's not make those mistakes again, and let's
not pretend they didn't happen.
Let's acknowledge them and make sure that they never happen again. And I think that that's one of the messages really of this film as well, because they, again, very subtly at times show the innocence of youth, but then they twist that innocence of youth like a knife right at the end, quite literally actually, when Mickey Bo is convinced by the villains of the piece, a couple of bullies that live on his side of the town, that John Joe is a bad person, that John Joe stole his bike. And
it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting statement on grief. That touching on what we've been talking about last week, in that Mickey Bo knows John Joe didn't steal his bike. Like, Mickey Bo knows full well these bullies are the people who stole his bike. Logically, he knows that.
But then at the same time, the bullies were there when Mickey Bo's dad died. The bullies were there to support him. The bullies were there to look after him. Whereas for a variety of reasons,
Mickey Bo's dad dies
at the end.
In an attack,
a shooting. And
they. It's a rather touching scene, that actually, between Mickey Bo.
Beautiful scene. Yeah, and it is deceased father.
Dad.
But I mean, obviously, it's a simple, short but enlightening look on how easy it would be for certain people to be radicalized, especially when you get them young. And obviously, in a case of like during the Troubles, there were plenty of young people that were angry and confused and grieving, and if the wrong people put their arm around them to console that grief, then it's very easy to go the wrong way.
And that is very much how people get radicalized.
Exactly. And it's obviously, I mean, this film came out not long after 9/11. Which, of course, at that point had started to dominate the idea of what terrorism was, and it was a strange. I mean, it was certainly a strange one for me. I think for you, with you not necessarily remembering the Troubles that much, but like the sudden twist of like the narrative just because something had finally happened in America, like. America had terrorism before, but mostly it was domestic terrorism of like absolute nutters that wanted to use a bomb instead of a gun. Like, how crazy is that? Like, but because they'd finally got a significant bit of international terrorism on their land. Suddenly, obviously, the narrative changed, the media was changed, the dominance was changed, and it was something that, it became a very hard focus. And I don't ever remember the Troubles in Northern Ireland as active as real as the violence was on the mainland as well. and something that like we knew that we could end up in a bomb one day, like just by going to the shops in a major city.
Yeah.
Like when I lived up in the north, like I do now, going into Newcastle or going into Durham, could have been a potentially dangerous thing. Like in the northeast here, religion is the strongest it probably is in the entirety of the of England. So there would have been potential cells of the various terrorist groups during the Troubles that were up here. Luckily, obviously, I never was in one. But yeah, it was a strange time, definitely a strange time. So you're deep in thought.
Pardon?
You're deep in thought.
Yeah, I don't think. I'm not sure if the film has a happy ending as such, but
I think it does.
What's
I think it has as happy as it can be,
because the implication is that Mickey Bo gets caught in the same cycle as his father.
Yeah.
John Joe escapes, but Mickey Bo never does.
John Joe actually makes it to Australia, which is where the boys want to go throughout the whole film. In their Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid style escape, they are trying to catch a ferry to Australia.
And the film is framed, at the end at least, as John Joe writing a letter home to Mickey Bo to remind him of
what friendship can be.
Yeah.
And I think obviously you see adult Mickey Bo in the pub in the same seat that his dad would have sat in all those years ago, watching the horse racing as his dad would have done all those years ago. And obviously you can make various assumptions that obviously he didn't necessarily get out of town. He hasn't necessarily got a good job at this point. We all know that after the Thatcher era, various forms of industry across the whole of the United Kingdom, be it mining, steelworks, or in the case of Belfast shipyards, took a bit of a hit. The Belfast shipyards are not what they used to be. So you can make all sorts of assumptions about Mickey Bo. But I think it was that it was the offer of a letter of friendship that was the most important thing. The fact that like he did end the film with a smile.
Yeah.
That no matter what had happened in those years in between, he had some sort of hope. And I think that's the real message of the film, that like there is hope. Because again, this was not that long after the Good Friday Agreement. And excuse me. And in a time of great fear because of, as we just talked about, the 9/11 and the subsequent actions and the fresh wars that we all declared. And this was very much a message of hope, and one I very much enjoyed.
That's another recommendation I have for the anyone wanting to watch more Northern Irish based media. The recent Channel 4 sitcom Derry Girls.
You know, I still haven't got around to watching it.
It's on Netflix. It's also on 4 on demand.
Yep.
But no adverts on Netflix. It's one of my favourite sitcoms of recent years. It's very, very.
I have heard it's absolutely magnificent. Yeah.
Yeah.
So certainly something I'll give a watch to. It's it was a great film. I really enjoyed watching it. I know enjoyed might be an odd term to use for the subject matter, but it was a brilliant film, really well made, and the two kids are just incredible. Like Mickey Bo in particular, the actor who plays Mickey Bo. He's a what's his name? John Joseph McNeil is the actor's name. I don't think he's done much since then.
Nope.
No, he's not done anything of note since 2006, at least
Acting
film-wise.
might not have been his...
I mean, there's no saying he didn't go on to do stage work.
Yeah.
Like, because he'd still be relatively young. So on to the other film.
Yeah, before we hop back in our balloon, I believe you've got some thoughts on the
other film. Yes. So The Foreigner from 2017. Excuse me. So initially released in China as a cinematic release, and then it came to Netflix very, very, very late in the year. It's a film directed by Martin Campbell, who's most famous for doing two of the best Bond films, for Casino Royale and GoldenEye. And it stars the Bond from GoldenEye, Pierce Brosnan, and Jackie Chan.
For, doing Green Lantern.
Pretty sure Pierce Brosnan didn't do Green Lantern.
No. That would have been
yeah. Martin Campbell is an odd director in that when he gets the right script, he can make truly incredible films. But when he gets the wrong script, he is also perfectly capable of making And unfortunately, this lands in the latter of those two categories. He sort of reminds me in a way of Ridley Scott, isn't it? Like, even his films are very, very beautiful. Like, they are very well shot. The action is superb. Like, he's most certainly an action director. But yeah, I mean, Ridley Scott, I think, is certainly criminal when it comes to sometimes not caring about the script as much as he cares about how nice it looks. And so, yeah, Martin Campbell kind of, you can accuse him of the same crimes. But in this case, yeah, it's released in 2017. So, and it seems to be set in 16, 17. So, roughly the same time. And it's an odd one because I feel like if it had been made last year or this year, then there's certain ideas that are in the film that have become more prevalent, more real, and more relevant. Because obviously this came out the year after the Brexit vote. And we all know that the one of the biggest issues with the Brexit vote is the potential for the Troubles in Northern Ireland to kick off again. Because of various reasons, including whether we're going to have a hard border with the Republic of Ireland, a hard border between mainland UK and Northern Ireland, all sorts of things. And this film is about a potential resurgence of the IRA, or a form of the IRA. Now, the IRA themselves have over time split into smaller subcategories. There's things like the Real IRA, and in this film, there's a group who call themselves the Authentic IRA. So it's meant to be a tiny little splinter group, not necessarily representative of the people who were in the IRA and the political side of the IRA, Sinn Féin, during the Troubles. All of those people, obviously, well, not all of those, but a vast majority of those people worked incredibly hard to bring peace to Northern Ireland. With the Good Friday Agreement and things like that. So there's some interesting ideas that are explored at the beginning of the film, and they kind of tease them, and it looks like they're going to they could go one of two routes, because obviously the other main star, Pierce Brosnan, is essentially playing Jerry Adams. A younger Jerry Adams, but he's essentially playing Jerry Adams, for those who are aware of who that is. Jackie Chan plays the foreigner, as the title would suggest, he's a Chinese immigrant who moved to the United Kingdom in the 70s, got his citizenship in 1984, and in the opening scenes of the film, his daughter dies in the first bombing of this new authentic IRA. Now, he has various... In his backstory, he is essentially a freedom fighter himself. So he was involved with some issues in Singapore, and in turn somehow managed to end up in Vietnam and fought alongside the American soldiers in Vietnam, which explains why unfortunately, when the film's derails itself into just an action thriller, it explains why Jackie Chan can beat the crap out of everyone that he encounters. But again, mentioning places like Singapore, it does bring up things like what's been going on in Hong Kong in the last year and a half, 2 years, which famously, much like Singapore, a British colony. And so there's some ideas here in this film of former British colonies or places where Britain and the Empire has left its mark and moved away and not necessarily left it in a good state. And yeah, I think with how Brexit is turning out, and I think how things have been going in Hong Kong in the last couple of years, I get the feeling that, like, if this film was made this year, it might be a drastically different film. I think almost exactly the same story could be told, but I think that they would tone down the action. So, because in the story, Jackie Chan's last surviving daughter dies because his two other daughters had died previously while escaping Singapore, and his wife had died in childbirth for the daughter that dies at the beginning of the film. So he is a completely broken man, and he decides to hunt down the terrorists that killed his daughter. He has nothing to live for, and so it almost kind of turns into Death Wish, because he goes on such a vengeance. Like he doesn't try and kill anyone, but he starts leaving bombs to scare Pierce Brosnan's character, because he knows that Pierce Brosnan's character probably knows who's done the bombing. So, and it goes quite dark, but not necessarily dark enough. Like, because you have some sympathy for Jackie Chan's character, but then he starts doing things that, like, are so extreme that you really should lose sympathy for him.
Yeah.
Like, it should get to a point where he is as much of a villain as Pierce Brosnan's character in a way. And again, to test it, like, just to show how easy it is really to slip into this cycle of violence, that how like violence begets violence, like, and it never really makes that leap.
Point.
Yeah, it never makes that point. In fact, he gets away with it at the end. The British police just allow him to go back to his Chinese restaurant and live his life, even though he finally does actually kill some people. He finds the terrorists that have done the bombings, and brutally murders them. But because he's done the dirty work for the British police, the guy who's in charge of this particular wing of the British police, decides, you know what, we'll leave him alone. Like, it was
not the film it could have been.
Yeah, as I say, it became Death Wish, and I think that like you could have actually had almost exactly the same story of him actually going completely off his nut and blowing things up.
It sounds,
and it could have told a better story within that framework.
I started watching it but didn't finish it, and it sounds like my thoughts of it being 24 like weren't too far off the mark.
I don't think it's even 24 like. I think the thing is that like 24 at least had the.
Me and you have quite different views on 24, but
I love 24, but I can completely understand that obviously 24 like glorifies certain things. But I think the thing is that like 24 never necessarily pretends to be anything but glorifying certain things. And as such, there is a level where if you're enjoying it, you can sort of forgive it for what it is. Whereas like this sort of, I don't know, this takes
I get what you're saying,
yeah. I mean, again, obviously, it probably didn't help that it was a predominantly Chinese funded film. So Jackie Chan needed to be a hero. He needed to probably get away with it. So, like, as far as the funding goes, but again, I think that's the part of the problematic things with how films are funded. That there's always going to be some sort of input from the money men in a film such as this, and it's a shame, really. Because you go on.
Oh no, you.
Because again, as we said at the beginning of this segment, Martin Campbell, when dealt with a good script and the right script, is more than capable of making a truly stunning film. And getting incredible performances. I mean, the performances in this are spotless. It's just that there's something missing about what they're trying to deliver. Jackie Chan's incredible. Before he becomes old man Jackie Chan later on in the film and just starts blowing people up and kicking asses. Jackie Chan as an actor is outstanding in this film. And Brosnan's as good as Brosnan's going to get. He does a very good job in this. Obviously, Brosnan is Irish, so he's got like some first-hand experience on some of the background of the ideas of this film, I suppose. And again, I mean, like Jackie Chan made his international money by being a Hong Kong film star, not by being a Chinese film star. So he should have some sort of political sense of what's going on there as well. And I think, again, I just wish this film was made probably by the same people, but now rather than in 2016, 2017.
So we're off to our balloon again.
Yep.
Where is the balloon taking us next week?
Well, there's only one full-size country that's left in the home nations and Republic of Ireland for us to visit, and that is Scotland. So that'll bring us almost full circle back round to where we started with Get Carter. Obviously, Get Carter was based in the northeast of England, so quite close to the border. So we'll be going, almost full circle back round to Scotland. There are some obvious choices for Scotland. We are yet to make a decision on where we're going with Scotland.
I potentially would like to not pick an obvious choice, but let's see what happens.
I think, as with everything that we review, whether it be on this or double feature or something like that, we do make every effort to make it so that you don't have to pirate stuff, or ideally don't have to go out and spend an extortionate amount of money buying the Blu-ray or something like that. So it will most likely be whatever's on Netflix or Amazon, or potentially BBC iPlayer, ITV Hub, Channel 4, that sort of stuff. One of the options actually this week, because it's such a famous film that's about the Troubles, was The Crying Game, which is on the BFI player to rent for £3.49 currently.
And on Blu-ray.
And of course on Blu-ray, yes.
Also from BFI.
Yeah. So if you did fancy watching that, that is available relatively cheap. The list we actually used this week for finding our films was an interesting one. It was from a website called almostginger.com, which is a cinematic travel blog, so not terribly different to what we're doing, but where the site compiles films to inspire you to visit various locations. So they've got a list of 19 films that might make you want to visit Northern Ireland, because as much as obviously it's had some troubling and violent past, it is a beautiful part of the world. So it's including actually probably the most beautiful of the films, although it's in there for just a bit of a joke, is Your Highness. Where is it? There we go. Your Highness, which was a film released in 2011, directed by David Gordon Green. And it's it's like a medieval weed comedy. So it's awful, but it's shot in Northern Ireland, so you get to see some of the absolutely stunning countryside. So maybe watch it on mute and enjoy the visual treat. So
we'll see you all next week.
Yeah, we'll see you in Scotland.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Yeah.